I first met Ross Morgan when he auditioned for the Army Band and really enjoyed his playing. Ross was a fantastic tuba player, and Ross had a fantastic sound. He had a huge sound. Even though at that time he was playing a little Cervini Piggy, he still had a great sound.
Well, I first met Ross Morgan in 1974 when he first joined the band. Didn't really know much about him at first, but I would hear things about him. Ross was in the ceremonial band and I was in the concert band at the time when he first came in. But I'd keep hearing these stories about him that were rather unusual, to say the least.
I soon became fast friends with Ross, and we roomed together, I guess, for nearly 20 years in the band. Ross was a great guy. I liked him from the start. He had a wonderful personality, he was funny, and we just seemed to hit it off.
Probably the one thing I miss most about Ross is his sense of humor.
There are a lot of funny stories about Ross.
Stories like, when he was in college, he was on his way to play with a brass quintet for a wedding, and a deer ran out in front of the car, and the car hit the deer and killed it, and everybody was very upset about it, but Ross was like, well, we can't let this venison go to waste. So in his tux, he just field dressed the deer, tied it onto the car, and they went to the wedding. Those kind of stories.
I remember one time we were up in New York, upstate New York, I think Messina, New York, on a band trip. And we were all sitting out by the pool. There were just so many lawn chairs, not enough for everybody. I was sitting in a lawn chair, and Ross came over and asked me if he could sit in the lawn chair. And I told him, you know, Ross, I'm pretty comfortable here. And so Ross, not wanting me to have the lawn chair, and he couldn't have it, so he folded me up in the lawn chair.
You know, before I even really got to know him, I kind of felt like, hey, this is somebody really unusual, very special. I need to get to know this guy. And I'm glad that I got to.
Ross was an inspiring tuba player. I sat next to him for many years in the concert band. I was always amazed at Ross's ability to get a huge sound. Now, he played on a huge tuba, but any tuba he played on, he made a big sound.
Ross was one of the finest tuba players I've known in my career, both here and also in the Marine Band. I remember fondly many a concert band rehearsal when he would lean over to the euphonium section and include the tuba section as well and say, "Come on, boys, let's get it right. We're dragging. We can't be dragging. We got to keep it moving."
There's a lick at the end of an arrangement of West Side Story that we used to play quite a lot, and there's a tuba solo part at the very end, and arpeggio that goes up to an F sharp, and it's an awkward lick, and I never heard Ross miss that last note ever. He seemed to be so confident, he always just nailed that note, and I was always inspired by the fact that Ross seemed to be a great player. He didn't seem to have much ego associated with his tuba playing. He wasn't ever in a competition mode. He would just lay back and hit the notes.
Ross was a very fine musician, but as any tuba player knows, there's lots of times when you get, from the conductor, you get the hand. You know, it's like, hey, that's enough, guys. You're playing too loud. We've all had that happen. And I will never, ever forget Colonel Allen dressing down the tuba section one time and saying, you know, you guys just play too loud all the time. And Ross sounds like 6 tuba players just by himself. So of course from then on, you know, it was, well, how many tubas do we need on this job? Well, if we have Ross, that's as good as 6.
The Tuba Euphonium Conference really started as a result of 2 things. First of all, the TUBA, the former ITEA, had a conference up at the University of Maryland. And also at that time, the Navy Band Saxophone Symposium was a really big deal.
We started that in 1983. What's now ITEA, TUBA at that time had a conference at the University of Maryland that was a big success. But we felt like there needed to be more involvement by military band guys. And Jeff Arwood and Ross Morgan and myself, we talked a lot about that, and finally kind of came to the realization, mainly at Jeff's suggestion, that we ought to put on some sort of a workshop.
So Jack, Ross, and I decided, well, let's ask Colonel Allen about this. So we made an appointment.
The three of us walked into Colonel Allen's office. Jeff did most of the talking. I think Ross and I just kind of sat there and nodded.
Colonel Allen was very receptive. Especially, we talked about the possibility of having Harvey Phillips come and play with the band. And Colonel Allen loved that idea. And so Don Young, the producer for the band, was in the room. And Colonel Allen said, "Don, these guys think they're big movers and shakers in the tuba world." Said, give them whatever they want.
Colonel Allen was very supportive of the idea and basically just gave us the ball and let us run with it. What made it work and what made it run smoothly was Ross. Jeff and I would invite the guest artists. We would decide what was going to happen, figure out what the program was going to be, and then we'd hand it over to Ross, and Ross just basically made it happen.
Without Ross Morgan, the Tuba Euphonium Conference would not be here today. Ross spent many years running the logistics of the conference, and that is the nuts and bolts. Ross was an action guy. If something needed to be done, Ross got it done.
The legacy that he leaves is quite incredible when you consider how many years this workshop has gone on and been very successful. And without his leadership, as well as Jack Tilbury and Jeff Arwood, we would not have the workshop at the level that it is, both nationally and internationally.
Ross played an important role in transitioning between the founders of the Tuba Euphonium Conference and the next generation. Ross was the bridge and left us with a legacy of a conference that's still very alive and healthy and still brings something very unique to tuba and euphonium players.
I think one thing that as I look back on my friendship with Ross over the years that has stuck with me is that Ross was just a regular guy.
One of my lasting memories of Ross is what he would call the tuba party, for lack of a better term, that he would have every fall at his house, and it would be a crab feast. And he always provided the crabs, all the drinks, all the fixings, and he opened up his home each year for all the tuba and euphonium players in TUSAB. And that was always kind of a nice time to be able to get together, to be able to share stories, and also to hang out with some of the guys that had gone before us that had retired previously.
I early on realized that Ross's family was really important to him, that Ross enjoyed the role of husband and father, and I got many small snippets of role model from Ross about how to be a husband and how to be a dad.
Ross was one of these guys that reminded you of where you came from, because he reminded us of where he came from.
He was very rough on the outside. Nobody would disagree with that. But he was a marshmallow on the inside. I'm sure people that went in to talk with Ross that had problems could see that. Ross really went to bat for the people in the band. He had an affinity for people in the band. He wanted the best for them.
What I miss most about Ross is the fact that he always gave you a fair shake, regardless of whether or not it's the answer that you were looking for. I always respected the fact that Ross was a straight shooter. You knew that you were going to get from Ross what was in the best interest of the unit and in your best interest, whether you liked it or not. He always tried to do the right thing.
The funniest story that I could possibly share about Ross was actually my first job with the concert band. And as we were sitting ready to do our patriotic opener, this was probably 10 minutes before it started, Ross gets my attention. He elbows me, and he's got this really, really devious grin on his face. And he whispers to me, he says, "Watch this." And he pulls out his main slide, and he empties it in the saxophone player's cup that's sitting in front of us. And then he quietly puts his slide back into his horn, and I'm almost in tears, and so is he. A few minutes later, the saxophone player reached under his chair and took a nice long gulp and never noticed that he had what you would definitely consider as a mixed drink.
One time I was warming up before band rehearsal, and sometimes the folders are on the stand. Sometimes they aren't if you show up early enough. And so I was warming up, and somehow Ross decided he was going to hand out the folders. So he was walking along the stands and setting the folders on the stands, and he put my folder on my stand. And just to sort of be funny, I stopped playing, and I looked at him, and I said, "Sergeant Major, could you please open that for me?" And Ross said, "No problem." Grabbed the folder, pulled it as hard as he could. All of the music went flying. The folder went flying. The stand fell over. And Ross looked at me and said, "Anything else?" I said, "No, Sergeant Major, that'll be fine."
Yeah, that's what I'm going to miss.
Somebody once said, think of the nicest person you could think of. Next to Ross, he was a bum. Ross was a fantastic guy. Ross was the type of person you meet just a couple times in your life, maybe. And I was honored to have known him as my best friend, and I'll miss him greatly.
I am proud of the legacy that he left here, and I wish he was still here.